Hey everybody, it's Spicey Kai. Today I want to talk to you about the opioids epidemic in our country. Did you know that 80% of the people who do heroin today started out on prescribed painkillers, specifically opioids? And the astounding part is that most people become addicted in just 5 days. But yet, not too long after the addiction begins, because of current regulations, they have to be cut off of the opioids. So they turn to the streets and get what's faster and cheaper, and that's heroin. But come to find out, even within the federal government, it's known that medical cannabis could actually help with the epidemic. But of course, we have all the politics involved. But according to my research, there are some politicians out there that do understand that it's a problem, it needs to be fixed, and if cannabis can do it, we should go for it. Check it out.
Giving a patient an opiate medication for the first time is a momentous decision. Other than for patients with intractable terminal pain for conditions such as advanced cancer, this should only be done if other options fail.
These are essential medicines for easing suffering at the end of life and when used for a couple of days after major surgery or a serious accident.
Opioids include OxyContin, Vicodin, oxycodone, hydrocodone, codeine, morphine, fentanyl, and the illegal street drug heroin. Now, before we get started, go ahead and thumbs up this video, and please make sure to share it so we can get the word out about the heroin epidemic in our country. And if you're new to my channel, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you get notified every time I drop a new video about the injustices in America.
Hey, did you know that behind America's opioid epidemic lies a carefully planned strategy by a hostile foreign power that experts are calling chemical warfare? Communities across America are being ravaged by synthetic opioids, with more than 32,000 Americans having died to these drugs just last year alone. Do you know which hostile foreign power they're referring to? The Chinese Communist Party. According to a report by the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, China is the largest source of illicit fentanyl in the United States. To give you an idea of how much of this stuff comes here from China, just last month, Mexican authorities seized 52,000 pounds of fentanyl from a shipping container from Shanghai. 52,000 pounds in a single container. As you may know, fentanyl is 50 times more potent than heroin and 100 times more potent than morphine. It's so unbelievably strong that a tiny, tiny pinch is enough to kill a person. That means that shipping container from Shanghai contained enough fentanyl to kill 11 billion people. What's even more shocking than this is that the Communist Party of China has long used this strategy of drug warfare to subvert other nations, and even laid out their tactics in a book titled Unrestricted Warfare, published by the People's Liberation Army. So even though it sounds almost unimaginable in this day and age, the opioid crisis devastating our country is at least partly caused by the Chinese Communist Party's deliberate effort to take down America.
Between 2002 and 2013, heroin use went up by more than 60%. Tragically, the heroin death rate also increased by nearly 300%. Heroin abuse is highest among males, non-Hispanic whites, people with low incomes, people without insurance and not enrolled in Medicaid, and those living in large urban areas. But researchers found big increases in groups who have historically had low rates of heroin use: women, people with higher income, and people with private insurance. Nearly all heroin users report using another drug in addition in the past year. 2 out of 3 used at least 3 drugs. Cocaine continues to be commonly used alongside heroin, but we also found a startling increase, 130%, among people using heroin and prescription opioids without a medical reason. Our data show that people who are abusing or dependent on prescription opioids are 40 times more likely to be abusing or dependent on heroin. There's been speculation that the decrease in inappropriate opioid prescribing is driving people to abuse drugs such as heroin more. Clinicians have an important role in reversing this troubling trend in heroin abuse. We need to talk with our patients about the serious risks of taking prescription opioids. These risks include both addiction as well as overdose and death. We need to remind our patients of other pain treatment options that may be more appropriate for their condition and less likely to lead them down a terrible pathway.
My name is Rebecca. I started using opiates at the age of 14. I was an athlete. I danced and cheered, and I was tumbling at cheerleading practice, and then I blew my ankle out, and I got prescribed painkillers by my doctor.
Rebecca's story is like so many others. You see it begin right at childhood.
Her addiction really started very innocently. She was a very accomplished dancer as an adolescent and had an ankle injury at the age of 14. Her medical treatment escalated to the use of very, very powerful opioid medications very early on.
This disease does not discriminate at all. It looks exactly the same, and it will take you to the exact same places. It doesn't matter what town you live in.
They say that you make a conscious decision to get high, to do drugs. I didn't know. I trusted my doctor to take care of me and make me better. There was no caution, no red flag at all. It was take these, you'll feel better, and that was it. And then 2 months later, I had habit already, just from the pain pills. So that's when the heroin started. I know that these next few days aren't going to be pretty, and I'm the most camera-shy person in the world, but if making my detox public is going to help somebody, even literally just one person, I'm all for it. I want the next girl that gets injured dancing to know what the future could hold by the next decision that she makes. Because that decision I made to go to the doctors and to not get the surgery, that's the worst decision I ever made in my whole life.
Those prescribed opioids before graduating high school are 33% more likely to misuse prescription opioids after graduating. In 2016, enough painkillers were prescribed to medicate every American adult 30 milligrams of hydrocodone every day for almost a month. Over 2/3 of those admitted into substance abuse programs first used a non-heroin opioid by the age of 25. 80% of all heroin users started with a prescription painkiller. Dependence on prescription opioids can happen in just 5 days. Day-to-day editor Bill Sternberg lost his son Scott to opioid overdose in 2017. He hopes that sharing his experience can help others and shed light on the treatment system's flaws.
There are a lot of people out there now in my position. The latest statistics show there are 72,000 people who died last year in the United States from drug overdoses. So imagine a completely full 737 plane crashing every day. So if you're losing 200 people a day from plane crashes or terrorists, I think society would be more up in arms. But because of the stigma, because this is generally 1 or 2 deaths at a time, it's less so.
In your column, you talk about the 3 stages of the opioid epidemic. Could you go over those again?
Sure. I call it a tragedy in 3 acts. Act 1 was drug makers, distributors, and doctors absolutely saturating the country with opioid prescriptions and either not knowing or greedily ignoring how addictive these opioids are.
And you believe that's how your son got started in college?
We believe that the first time Scott was exposed to opioids was after he had an appendectomy later in college, and it developed an infection, and they threw 30 days of opioids at him. And originally, when they were selling OxyContin and similar drugs, doctors were being told there was a less than 1% chance of addiction, and that pain was the fifth vital sign. Further research, and I've asked a lot of people this, there's still no solid number, but somewhere between 5% and 20% of people, if you give them a 30-day prescription for Oxy or another strong opioid, they'll become addicted or dependent. So you had a huge number of people addicted to opioids. The opioids became harder to obtain as certain controls were put on, and they turned to heroin, which was both cheaper than opioids and gave a better high. And now we're in the third stage of this tragedy, where both the heroin and some of the counterfeit pain pills are being laced with synthetic opioids called fentanyls, mainly coming in from China and Mexico, that are extremely powerful and can be extremely lethal, which is why, even as you're seeing the number of prescriptions for opioids decline, the death rate is spiking up. A 16% increase last year over 2016.
We have reported on the causes and effects of the opioid epidemic for several years, interviewing government whistleblowers, doctors, and Americans who've grown dependent on the powerful pain pills. We have not had a high-ranking executive from the pharmaceutical industry sit before our cameras until now. Tonight, Ed Thompson, a drug manufacturer who spent decades managing and producing opioids for Big Pharma, breaks ranks to denounce his industry and its federal regulator, the Food and Drug Administration, which he says opened the floodgates on the crisis with a few little changes to a label.
The root cause of this epidemic is the FDA's illegal approval of opioids for the treatment of chronic pain.
Other than for patients with intractable terminal pain for conditions such as advanced cancer, this should only be done if other options fail.
These are essential medicines for easing suffering at the end of life and when used for a couple of days after major surgery or a serious accident.
The FDA ignited this opioid crisis.
Without question, they start the fire.
Ed Thompson told us when the top-selling opioid OxyContin was first approved in 1995, it was based on science that only showed it safe and effective when used short-term. But in 2001, pressured by Big Pharma and pain sufferers, the FDA made a fateful decision, and with no new science to back it up, expanded the use of OxyContin to just about anyone with chronic ailments, like arthritis and back pain.
So this is what a package insert looks like.
The FDA did it by simply changing a few words on the label. That lengthy insert no one ever reads. Today, the label says the powerful pain pills are effective for daily, around-the-clock, long-term treatment. And that small label change made a big change in the way drug companies would market all opioids, allowing them to sell more and more pills at higher and higher doses.
A drug's label is the single most important document for that product. It determines whether somebody can make $10 million or $1 billion. How so? Because it allows you to then promote the drug based on the labeling.
Ed Thompson is challenging the FDA to start with his newest opioid. It's Thompson's creative way to sabotage the system. He may lose money rolling out his new drug, but if he is successful, it would set a precedent. Other manufacturers would be forced to change their labels and limit their marketing. A decision going in your direction could pull down a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Correct. Probably somewhere between $7 and $10 billion a year would come off the market.
Brandeis professor Dr. Andrew Kolotny is one of the country's most recognized addiction specialists and has been an expert witness in litigation against Big Pharma, including Purdue, the maker of OxyContin. He has been trying to get the FDA label changed since 2011 to make clear opioids are not for everyone.
These are essential medicines for easing suffering at the end of life and when used for a couple of days after major surgery or a serious accident. If you're taking them around the clock every day, quickly you become tolerant to the pain-relieving effect. In order to continue getting pain relief, you'll need higher and higher doses. As the doses get higher, the treatment becomes more dangerous and the risk of death goes up.
And that sounds exactly like heroin addiction.
It's essentially the same drug.
To understand how this began, we traveled to this small courthouse in Welch, West Virginia, where we uncovered the minutes of secret meetings in 2001 between Purdue Pharma and the FDA. The files were part of the state's lawsuit against Purdue for deceitful marketing. 60 Minutes got a court order to obtain these documents. They reveal it was at those secret meetings the FDA bowed to Purdue Pharma's demands to ignore the lack of scientific data and change the label to, quote, around the clock for an extended period of time.
I can't think of anything more harmful that took place then. It opened the floodgates. It was the decision of no return for the FDA.
60 Minutes has called on former FDA Commissioner David Kessler many times for his expertise on drug safety issues. He ran the FDA in the 1990s when OxyContin was first approved, but he left before the labeling change. Today, he's been retained by cities and counties suing Big Pharma for the opioid crisis. After reviewing the documents we obtained and checking on his own, he says changing the label to long-term use was a mistake.
There are no studies on the safety or efficacy of opioids for long-term use.
Dr. Andrew Kolodny agrees. The Brandeis addiction specialist began his own investigation into why the FDA would approve the long-term use of opioids when there was no credible science to back it up.
What did you find? We found out that a group of experts and FDA and pharmaceutical companies were having private meetings, and at these meetings, changing the rules for how opioids get approved.
He filed Freedom of Information Act requests in email after email between the FDA, Big Pharma, and consultants. He learned of closed-door meetings at luxury hotels like this Four Seasons in Washington, D.C., where for $35,000 apiece, drug makers paid consultants to, quote, sit at a small table with the FDA, hobnobbing with the regulators. Emails show one participant worrying it might be seen as pay-to-play.
They had drugs in their pipeline, pain medicines that they wanted approved, and through these meetings they were able to get those products on the market.
That sounds unethical.
It is unethical.
If not illegal.
If it's not illegal, it should be illegal.
Equally suspicious, but legal, the large number of key FDA regulators who went through the revolving door to jobs with drug manufacturers. The two medical officers who originally approved OxyContin, Curtis Wright and Douglas Kramer, went to work for the opioid maker Purdue Pharma not long after leaving the FDA.
The culture at FDA continues to be much too cozy with the industry it's supposed to be regulating.
The agency bills drug companies more than $800 million a year in fees and depends on that industry money to pay the salaries of staffers who not only change the opioid label, but also review new drugs like Desuvia, the most powerful opioid pill ever approved. Just a few weeks ago, the FDA approved a new opioid that is 1,000 times more powerful than morphine, and this is in the middle of this opioid epidemic. How is that possible?
I don't get it. I get your question. I don't get the agency's action.
Isn't the FDA supposed to be our watchdogs to protect us?
How many people do you think were working in a division that oversaw promotion when this epidemic started to occur?
I have no idea.
5. You have a system of pharmaceutical promotion that changed the way medicine practiced, and no one, right, stopped it.
We got a real problem here. Ed Thompson isn't waiting. He has now joined a growing movement of doctors, lawyers, and patient activists who want Big Pharma to kick its addiction to opioid profits. That's why he made the decision to take on his industry and the FDA.
If you succeed, you could pull down a multi-billion-dollar industry. And if I fail, you're going to have ever-increasing deaths every day as well.
Scott, the judge here in Oklahoma has found for the state and against Johnson & Johnson, declaring that J&J caused a public nuisance here in the state of Oklahoma, caused this opioid crisis. He says it can be abated and has ordered Johnson & Johnson to pay $572 million to abate the opioid crisis here in the state of Oklahoma. Now, that is less than some on Wall Street were looking for, though it is much more than Purdue settled for, which was $270 million.
We are seeing a pop in J&J stock after hours, up 3.3%, perhaps on that point that Meg just made, that it was less money, perhaps, than it could have been, right, Mike? That they were ordered to pay $572 million.
Yeah, not a tremendous number for J&J. Obviously, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't free the company permanently. It's still an ongoing process. There's going to be further liability for the industry down the road, but clearly, on a trading basis, the market was leaning toward the possibility that it could have been a much bigger ruling in terms of financial impact.
The following article is from Science Daily. It's dated August 7, 2019. Entitled Marijuana Legalization Reduces Opioid Deaths. Summary: a new study finds that marijuana access leads to reductions in opioid-related deaths. A new economic inquiry study finds that marijuana access leads to reductions in opioid-related deaths. The study examined how the changing legal status of marijuana has impacted mortality in the United States over the past 2 decades. Investigators found that legalization and access to recreational marijuana reduced annual opioid mortality in the range of 20% to 35%, with particularly pronounced effects for synthetic opioids. The research extends prior findings that medical marijuana laws reduce opioid mortality rates. The findings are timely given the scale of the opioid epidemic in the United States and growing calls for marijuana legalization throughout North America. Recreational marijuana laws affect a much larger population than the medical marijuana laws, yet we know relatively little about their effects. Focusing on the recent wave of recreational marijuana laws in the U.S., we find that opioid mortality rates drop when recreational marijuana becomes widely available via dispensaries.
Today is the first day the new opioid alternative pilot program launched in Illinois. With a doctor's approval, it gives patients the option of buying medical marijuana at a licensed dispensary rather than using prescribed opioids to treat pain.
Diagnosed with sickle cell disease as a child, 31-year-old Tanisha Altman has been living with severe pain most of her life.
Have you ever had a Charlie horse before? Think of that times 12, but you can get it in your eye, you can get it in your legs, your neck, your face.
Old high school and college football injuries have left 27-year-old Dan with chronic pain as well.
Especially in the colder months, you feel all those old injuries start like popping back up. Like right now, the past couple of days, I've been really hurting.
Both Tanisha and Dan have been prescribed opioids, but did not like the way the drugs made them feel, and they feared addiction.
You could kind of feel it creeping up on you. Where you're like, I need another one.
You can't wake up from them. You black out, you don't remember stuff.
Instead, Tanisha and Dan are turning to medical marijuana to relieve their pain. They are the first patients to buy medical cannabis under the new Illinois Opioid Alternative Pilot Program. The law allows access to medical cannabis for people who have or could receive a prescription for opioids by an Illinois licensed physician.
As we all know, Colorado is the pioneer of this entire industry, from the medical marijuana all the way down to the recreational, also known as legalized marijuana. And Colorado has went out of their way to improve their MMJ rules, which pretty much stands for medical marijuana. And what they did was they went and tweaked their medical marijuana laws, and the new process is going to effect on November 14th of this year. The new rules include allowing doctors, dentists, and some nurses and certain medical professionals with prescribing power and a valid license to practice within his or her scope of practice to recommend medical marijuana. So that basically means that they opened it up to make it so more professionals are allowed to provide medical marijuana recommendations. They also added a couple of more stipulations to the law. For one, 2 more laws will also give doctors the right to recommend medical marijuana for autism spectrum disorder. The very important part about this in relation to this video is they also give the right to recommend medical marijuana to any patient with a condition that qualifies for opioid medications. So what that means is, if a doctor prescribes you opioids and you decide you do not want the opioids, this new law says that that doctor has to prescribe you medical marijuana in place of that. That's pioneering right there. The following article is from marijuanamovement.net. The title is Top Federal Health Official Says Marijuana's Legal Status is Inhibiting Research. It's dated September 26, 2019. A top federal health official said that marijuana's status as a Schedule I controlled substance inhibits research, and that there's a need for alternative regulatory pathway so that researchers can more easily study cannabis. During a hearing before the House, Representative Barbara Lee, a Democratic from California, shared an anecdote about cannabis lotion helping her mother treat pain in her knees, and asked what could be done to facilitate research in marijuana's therapeutic potential. Lee said that following knee surgery, her mom, quote unquote, was out getting her walker repaired, and a woman gave her some lotion and she tried it and she was never in pain anymore. This was cannabis lotion. So I have witnessed, at least my mother and other senior citizens, the health benefits of cannabis. I know good and well, based on personal experience, that it works for some people. The article goes on to say that she also noted that NCCIH, her department, is providing $3 million in grants to fund studies in the benefits of cannabis compounds beside THC, with a focus on developing therapeutic alternatives to prescription opioids. For the record, I am not capping for this presidential candidate, but he definitely has caught my attention.
Presidential hopeful Beto O'Rourke on Thursday unveiled a plan to legalize marijuana and end the war on drugs. The former Texas congressman would grant clemency to those currently serving sentences for marijuana possession, establish a model for marijuana legalization, and give grants to those affected by the war on drugs to help them benefit from the new industry. The drug war justice grants would be given to those formerly incarcerated for nonviolent marijuana offenses in state and federal prison. Licenses to produce, distribute, or sell marijuana would be funneled to minority-owned businesses, and fees would be waived for low-income individuals who had previously been convicted of related offenses.
I have been to like all the hospitals in this area, and I've watched the opioid crisis. Like, people get addicted to it. It's awful. People my age are committing suicide at alarming rates. This is a way that I personally believe we could help stem some of this. Is how are we going to end prohibition on marijuana on a federal level, because it's a better health for pain relief. It does wonders for many people with mental illness, including myself. So what's your thoughts on that?
Great question. So we lost more than 150,000 of our fellow Americans, our fellow human beings, to drug overdose and to suicide last year. We can either accept that, we can look at it as a force of nature or an act of God, or we can understand that there may be a human solution to some of these challenges and problems that our fellow Americans, our fellow human beings face. First of all, we should make sure that drug use, drug abuse, drug addiction is treated not as a criminal justice problem that will have you locked up with really no help or hope to get right and back on your feet and have that purpose and function that is so fundamental to your success and freeing yourself from those dependencies. We need to make sure that we invest in the resources for mental health care in America. In Texas, largest provider of mental health care services in our state is the county jail system. People with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression, getting arrested on purpose because it's the only way that they are guaranteed help. And then we, the taxpayer, pay for them to be fed and clothed and housed and medicated and seen temporarily by a social worker or therapist before they are then again on the streets. And guess what? The reason that so many people on the streets use drugs is not that the drug use led them to the streets. They're on the streets without access to health care, and it's the only way for them to medicate the problems that they have. So that investment in guaranteed, high-quality, universal health care, that investment specifically in mental health care, that understanding that we have to boldly change our criminal justice system to stop penalizing people for illnesses that they have, all of that is going to be the basis of getting this right, of reducing those numbers that I just shared with you, of getting people help who need help right now. What can we do? The wealthiest country, the most medically advanced country the world has ever known, if not be there for each other right now, especially when we have. To this end, especially since more than half the states in the union have already legalized marijuana in some form or other, they've medicinalized it, they've legalized it for recreational use, we should end the federal prohibition on marijuana. We can free ourselves from the distinction of being the country that imprisons more of its fellow citizens than any other country on the face of the planet. Though people in this country use illegal drugs at the same rate, no matter where they are, only some face arrest, faced imprisonment, and when they get out, forced to check a box that says they have a conviction, which diminishes their opportunities in life to hold a job, to raise a family, to get a student loan, and to be successful. For all those reasons, let's end the prohibition on marijuana. Thank you.
And there you have it. Now, we don't have all the answers just yet, but doesn't it make more sense to experiment with marijuana than it does opioids? Thanks so much for watching. Please like and share this video so we can spread the word about this natural alternative to opioids. And please leave your thoughts and comments below. And remember, don't forget to subscribe. Spicey out.